Since the dawn of time, man has been trying to understand the Earth, its origin, its composition, its formation. To do so, he has observed our planet from all points of view by means of physics, biology, mathematics, or even philosophy. Thanks to current scientific progress, research is progressing and concrete and rational answers are being found in large numbers. However, there are still elements that remain unexplored, parts of the Earth for which we still have many questions. Among these, the ocean arouses curiosity. The ocean is defined as a vast expanse of salt water between two continents. More than 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by the ocean. The ocean is divided into 5 parts: Pacific, Atlantic, Arctic, Southern, and Indian, and about 10 seas. The ocean is often referred to as the cradle of life, since water has accompanied life since its beginning. However, this oldest element remains the least known, and the ocean remains today one of the last explored parts of the Earth. It must be said that with an average depth of 3,682 meters, or 12,000 feet, the ocean represents 96% of the biospheric volume. The second largest ocean by surface area is the Atlantic Ocean. It extends from north to south and covers an area of about 100 million square kilometers, or more than 62 million square miles. It was formed by the separation of tectonic plates 180 million years ago. For centuries, it was the stage for European explorations. Today, it is an important navigation route for all the countries surrounding it. The Atlantic Ocean is also talked about for other reasons. Indeed, it contains a mysterious, coveted, sought-after, and decried area that has become sadly known because of the unexplained disappearances and shipwrecks that have taken place in its midst. Dear traveler, good morning. Today, I take you on a maritime exploration to discover the mysteries of a very strange area, the legendary Bermuda Triangle. Before leaving for a new adventure, think of liking the video and subscribing to the channel to not miss anything. Thanks to you all, and enjoy the video. In the heart of the Atlantic Ocean, the Bermuda Triangle is connected at 3 points by Miami, Puerto Rico, and the island of Bermuda. Its surface is not clearly established. It fluctuates according to stories and facts, but it would vary between 500,000 and 1.5 million square kilometers, or nearly 650,000 square miles. Legend describes this area as a place plagued by strange disappearances of ships, planes, and aircraft, most often without explanation. It is estimated that 4 planes and 20 boats disappear every year under mysterious conditions in the Bermuda Triangle. The idyllic setting would suggest other scenarios, with its turquoise waters, its white sandy beaches, its palm trees as far as the eye can see, and the sea as the only opposite. Moreover, the points of the triangle are themselves very touristy places and extremely popular with vacationers in search of exoticism. When we think of Miami, Puerto Rico, or the Bermuda Islands, our minds travel. And yet, we do not suspect that, located above a huge mountainous area, the Bermuda Triangle has abysses 8,000 meters deep. That is to say, more than 26,000 feet. For comparison, the deepest point of the Earth's crust, the Mariana Trench, is 10,994 meters deep, or 36,070 feet. In addition, the weather conditions in this area are particularly severe. More than 100 planes and ships have disappeared in this triangular area. The Bermuda Triangle is finally less paradisical than it seems. But how did the legend and the mystery around this area come about? And what are the reasons that could justify these numerous disappearances? In order to understand how the legend of the Bermuda Triangle came about, it's interesting to take a little trip into the past. Long before we talked about the infamous Bermuda Triangle, strange and unjustified events that had occurred at sea had been reported. In fact, in 1492, Christopher Columbus, the famous navigator, reported in his navigation reports that his compass was out of order while he was in the Bahamas area. In 1515, the Spanish navigator Juan de Bermudez discovered the Bermuda Archipelago in the Atlantic Ocean off the east coast of America. As early as 1600, the English established bases there following a shipwreck and built the first capital, St. George's. The archipelago of 300 small islands was then quickly colonized by the English and became British in 1707. The area of the Bermuda Triangle quickly became an obligatory passage for sailors, who thus gained precious navigation time in the area. The modern history of disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle would begin at the beginning of the 19th century. On June 10, 1800, the American schooner USS Pickering left Boston to reach Guadalupe. This ship, 23 meters long, or 75 feet, was last seen in Newcastle and would have disappeared with its crew of 105 people in September of the same year. The most plausible explanation is that it was caught in a cyclone, a tragic event, but not very surprising considering the weather conditions in the area. Except that from then on, the disappearances followed one another. In 1854, the Bella, a British ship heading for Jamaica, was lost. In 1866, it was the turn of the Swedish three-master Lada, and 2 years later, a Spanish merchant ship, Viego. The latter two were never found. One by one, the Atlanta, the Miramon, the Cyclops, and the SS Cotopaxi disappeared. By 1945, almost 30 planes and ships had disappeared in the ocean, most of them without a trace. As the tragic events followed one another without ever being explained, a mystery naturally and peacefully settled in. But it was finally in 1945, with the story of the disappearance of 19 Squadron, that the legend of the Bermuda Triangle was popularized, going from simple, mysterious accidents to sensational real facts. The authors then took up these stories based on the cases of ships and planes that ran aground without their bodies ever being found. The enigmatic theory of abduction by aliens is often brought up. At the time, the research did not allow for scientific answers, and it was difficult to reasonably explain the facts. But where does the name Bermuda Triangle come from? While a writer had in 1952 evoked in an article the term triangle to talk about the area, it is Vincent Gaddis, an American writer and journalist, who imposed in February 1964 a magazine cover entitled The Deadly Bermuda Triangle. This enigma and mystery enthusiast was inspired by various magazine articles published in the 1950s to popularize a mystery around the disappearances of the Bermuda Triangle. The following year, he published a book, Invisible Horizons, in which he exploited the legend through the narration of real and somewhat modified or even purely invented previous events. Among the hundreds of disappearances, some are more interesting than others. This is the case of Flight 19, which, as previously mentioned, will mark a turning point in the legend of the Bermuda Triangle. The USS Cyclops, which disappeared in 1918, remains the most deadly event. This ship had 309 victims on board. As for the cargo ship El Faro, it is one of the last disappearances recorded in the cursed zone. Despite numerous unexplained disappearances, it is only from the 20th century that the Bermuda Triangle begins to be considered a dangerous area. A significant event that occurred in 1945 will give birth to the legend, when 5 torpedo planes of the American Navy left for a training flight and will never come back. It was December 5th, 1945, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Training Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor, a skilled instructor with about 2,500 hours of flying experience, was preparing to take 5 Avenger aircraft off the coast of the United States for training. Each aircraft is loaded with a crew of 3, except for the pilot, who is accompanied by only 1 co-pilot. 14 men are a part of this exercise. The flight lasts 2 hours. The aircraft are checked before takeoff, and all are in good working order. The aircraft were refueled. The weather is good. The sea is calm. At 2:10 p.m., the 5 planes took off from the Fort Lauderdale base in Miami. For about an hour, the planes flew to the south of the island of Grand Bahama and practiced their bombing exercises. Radio chatter at the time showed that the training was a complete success. The Avengers now have to return to their home base in Fort Lauderdale, but that's when the flying conditions start to deteriorate. It's 3:40 p.m. The control tower recorded a strange conversation between the planes about the inefficiency of their radio compasses. This indispensable tool for receiving and indicating the direction of the beacons in relation to the cardinal points seems to be acting up and is no longer used by more than half of the crew in flight. It is now impossible for the Avengers to locate Fort Lauderdale, their point of return. Feelings of panic and impending loss immediately overwhelm the lieutenant and his crew. Their now blind navigation takes them off the radar of the US Navy. At this point, Lieutenant Taylor made the decision not to switch to the emergency frequency, which would have put him back in contact with the ground station, but would have caused him to lose contact with his crew. He then relies on his knowledge and his feeling in order to bring back his crew safely. Later, the Lieutenant Taylor emits a radio message. He says he recognizes the Florida Keys. He decides to set course for what he believes to be Fort Lauderdale. Unfortunately, at that moment, his plane would have been reported over the Bahama Islands, and his change of course moved him frighteningly far from the coast of Florida, in the direction of the open sea. It was 7 p.m. A final radio message was intercepted. Lieutenant Taylor prepares the Avengers to ditch. The planes have enough fuel to fly until 8 p.m. Night fell, and his crew was not authorized to fly at night. Since then, no more news has been given. Searches are immediately set up, but no traces of the planes has been found. No debris, no body. The story of Flight 19 rekindled the many legends that were already feeding the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. Even if there is no lack of rational explanations for this event, how can we explain that the compasses failed at the same time? And how is it possible that after more than 75 years of research, no trace of Flight 19 has ever been found? And to continue to feed this mystery, in parallel to this story, another tragic and unexplained event occurred the same evening. As soon as the radio contacts were cut with the 5 planes and it became obvious that Flight 19 was lost, 2 PBM-5 Martin Mariner seaplanes were sent. Codenamed Training 32 and Training 49, each with a 13-man crew, set out to find Lieutenant Taylor's formation. Training 32 flew to the Bahamas, while Training 49 headed for the Florida coast and then out to sea. After 10 minutes of flight, Training 49 disappeared from the radar screen, never to reappear again. Witnesses on a cargo ship in the same area claimed to have seen an explosion in the sky, as well as flames on the ocean. On December 5th, 1945, 6 planes and 27 men disappeared under unclear and unexplained circumstances. Since that day, researchers have attempted to find even a trace, a debris, but nothing. In 1977, in his film Encounter of the Third Kind, Steven Spielberg directs a scientist who finds the planes of Flight 19 in perfect conditions in a desert in Mexico. The scenario involves supernatural events and extraterrestrials, enough to enrich the mysterious theories of this tragedy. The disappearance of the Cyclops is the largest non-combat disappearance in the US Navy. In fact, 309 people, crew, and passengers combined sank with this cargo ship in 1918. The USS Cyclops was a coal carrier that was commissioned in 1910. It was designed to supply other ships with coal across the seas. In January 1918, the collier was assigned a voyage to supply British ships in the waters near Brazil. On 16 February 1918, she left Rio de Janeiro carrying a cargo of manganese. On 20 February, it entered Bahia, and 2 days later, it left for Baltimore. It was supposed to make this last trip without stopping, but on March 3rd and 4th, the ship stopped in Barbados, a small island in the Caribbean Sea, to load cargo. On March 4th, the Cyclops set sail again for Baltimore. The last message received from her was that all was well. Then, no more news. Even though the ship's communication tools had recently been put in place, the USS Cyclops still had the possibility to send an emergency message, but none was recorded. From March 13th, searches were launched, but they remained in vain. The most rational theory is that the cargo ship had to face strong winds of more than 130 kilometers per hour. The cargo was too heavy, and the ship became unbalanced and capsized. The investigation revealed that Captain Worley could have delivered the ship to the Germans, but no proof was found to confirm this hypothesis. Speculations with paranormal connotations also arose about a possible abduction by aliens. The sudden disappearance that leaves no trace causes questions to arise in the mind. In any case, this is the tragedy that has involved the most victims in the Bermuda Triangle. One of the most recent disappearances is that of the cargo ship SS El Faro in 2015. Today, with the technological advances and the construction of ships over-equipped with tools that allow us to locate ourselves precisely, we might think we are safe from tragedies and disappearances. But sometimes nature reminds us that it remains the strongest and the mistress of events. The ship El Faro is a concrete example. Here is its story. The date is October 1st, 2015. The 240-meter-long ship, more than 750 feet, was carrying containers. It left Jacksonville, Florida, bound for Puerto Rico, with a crew of 33 people on board. At the same time, a huge tropical storm started hundreds of kilometers away from the ship. The storm caught up with the El Faro and got in its way. The ship was then caught in the middle of Hurricane Joaquin. Trapped by winds of more than 200 kilometers per hour, or almost 125 miles per hour, and waves of 15 meters high, that is to say more than 50 feet, the ship was then challenged from all sides, and the crew understood that their chances of getting out of this disaster were diminishing. The captain of the cargo ship, Michael Davidson, sent a distress message to warn of the critical situation in which he and his crew found themselves, but the contact was quickly cut. The ship El Faro was then buried under the ocean, with the 28 Americans and 5 Poles who were on board. The hurricane calmed down as quickly as it had started. A search was quickly set up, and for weeks, teams scoured the area looking for debris, tracks, or anything else that might have helped locate the ship. A few days later, debris and an oil slick were seen floating off the Bahamas. The approximate position of the vessel El Faro was deduced. A team of investigators specialized in nautical accidents then began their research. Equipped with the state-of-the-art scientific scanner, the investigators' boat tracked the ocean floor for several days. The depth of the area is almost 5 kilometers. The research work is tedious. The remote-controlled robot that crisscrosses the seabed initially spots scattered debris. Shredded containers, pieces of equipment, and other parts of the boat were spread out over more than a kilometer. Then, on October 31st, investigators finally saw the hull. It was standing upright at a depth of more than 4,500 meters. More than 30 meters long, from the top of the mast to the keel, the wreck is impressive. The causes of the wreck were attributed 2 days later to the captain, who had underestimated the dangers of the hurricane and had showed a lack of communication with the land. But its position underwater led some to imagine the intervention of sea monsters that could have caught the boat and deposited it in the ocean depths. The number of accidents and inexplicable disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle have given rise to theories that are beyond comprehension. Indeed, faced with fear of the unknown, people's minds get heated, and the most fanciful often manage to find explanations where there are none yet. Between the beginnings of real scientific theories and deep-seated beliefs, here are some of the various answers that have been given to explain the mysteries of the Devil's Triangle. One of the oldest urban legends is that of the presence of aliens. The presence of life outside our planet Earth has always aroused curiosity. It is therefore quite quickly that ideas were born to link the disappearances that occurred in the Bermuda Triangle and the presence of aliens. These ideas were supported by the testimonials of sailors who reported rather strange events during their crossing of the zone. The account of a merchant sailor was found a few years ago, in which he describes having encountered an unidentified flying object while sailing in the Bermuda Triangle. The ship, coming from Cuba, had set course for Algiers. At one point, the crew realized that the ship was moving at a strangely high speed, while the dashboard indicated nothing of the sort. Then, the crew started to experience quite surprising symptoms. A feeling of heaviness was felt in their bodies. The captain could not even lift his arms. The ship's clocks were all off, and the gyroscope was found broken for no apparent reason. But it is what happened soon after that made the biggest impression. The sailor and the cook saw a large white flying object in the sky a few kilometers away from them. Then 2 smaller ones came closer to the larger one, and finally, all 3 disappeared. No reported explanation explains what was experienced and seen that day, but the sailor would justify that the movement of the UFOs would have affected the state of the crew and their relationship to time. A discovery was made in 2018 by Daryl Miklos, a journalist and explorer for a documentary channel. While immersed in the ocean near the Bahamas with the goal of fueling his research of shipwrecks in the region, he noticed something extraordinary. It was at a depth of about 90 meters, or 300 feet, that the explorer found a very strange structure. He said he had never seen anything like it before. He compares it to a spaceship, comprising a bulky body with 15 protrusions. In addition to this discovery, Daryl Miklos notices a mysterious series of structures in the area of the Bermuda Triangle, all covered with thick coral that he said were hundreds, even thousands of years old. The explorer suggested that they could be extraterrestrial structures, but only analysis and in-depth studies will be able to affirm this theory for 100%. But why would aliens have an interest in making our ships and planes disappear? Several justifications are often mentioned on this subject. The Bermuda Triangle would be the secret base of UFOs, who have come to abduct humans in order to carry out experiments, and perhaps they would have eliminated some troublesome ships and planes in the wrong place at the wrong time. The theory of the presence of extraterrestrials is often associated with the theory of vortexes. The latter would be like passages that would allow them to travel through universes. The doors of the vortex opening and closing in a random way, perhaps the ships and planes would have taken these passages and would disappear from the surface of the Earth. Or the aliens circulating in the vortex could be led to abduct human beings in order to learn more about us. It has long been supported the idea that the lost city of Atlantis would have a direct impact on the tragic events that occur in the Bermuda Triangle. Indeed, the magnetic aberrations that cause the malfunction of compasses of ships and airplanes would be due to radiation emitted from the city engulfed at the bottom of the ocean. Atlantis is a mythical island, which would be the size of a continent. Its origins come from Plato, who evokes it in two of his dialogues, the Critia and the Timaeus, that during the division of the world, Atlantis would have been attributed to Poseidon, the god of the sea. It would have been then swallowed by the waves during a cataclysm. The city remained for a long time poorly located in time and geography. But in the first half of the 20th century, Edgar Cayce, an American mystic endowed with psychic powers, showed a real interest in the mystery of Atlantis. He used to give himself readings under hypnosis about Atlantis. He described the continent in all its details and evoked the life that he himself had lived in the city as an Atlantean. He also predicted that the remains of an Atlantean temple would be found near Bimini in the Bahamas, in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. In the city of Atlantis lived a population with very advanced knowledge and rich natural resources. Thanks to these exceptional means and their remarkable technology, the Atlantean civilization would have developed powerful fire crystals from which it drew its energy. Despite the fact that the city is now sunken, Edgar Cayce thought that the fire crystals of the Atlanteans continued to radiate from the bottom of the ocean, and it would be these same rays that would disturb the magnetic field of the area, hence the disturbances of compasses and radios and possible accidents. In 1968, this hypothesis was reinforced by the discovery of the Bimini Road. It is a rock formation visible in the seabed. The shape and organization of these rocks make us think of a road or a wall that could have been made by man. Some researchers immediately associate this discovery to Atlantis, and in the fact that the city would have really existed, while others do not see any link, leaving Atlantis linked to the marvelous and the fantastic. Along the legends that would explain the sudden disappearances that occur in the Bermuda Triangle, one cannot escape the existence of marine monsters that would attack men. Among the described monsters, the Lusca holds a lot of attention by the quantity of testimonies that evoke it. Nicknamed the Terror of the Caribbean, the Lusca is an aquatic hybrid creature between the shark and the octopus, which is associated with a dragon-like appearance. The sea monster would evolve in the blue holes, which are very frequent around the Bahamas. These underwater sinkholes, sometimes very deep, are connected to underground caves, an ideal place for such a creature to hide. The Lusca would measure the gigantic size of 20 meters in length, that is to say, more than 65 feet long. Some more extravagant testimonies even speak about 60 meters, that is to say, 200 feet. It would have teeth sharpened like knife blades and tentacles with teeth. Some testimonies claim to have witnessed attacks of unprecedented violence. The Lusca is terribly frightening. They would kill all the fishermen or swimmers venturing too close to its sector. It would have even taken with them victims into its caves. Other testimonies claim to have seen the Lusca catching people on the pontoons of boats to take them underwater with them. With its large tentacles, it would be able to sink an entire ship and drag it into the depths. Finally, the whirlpools coming from the blue holes would in fact be due to the inhalations and exhalations of the underwater creature. Legend or reality. The time distortion is a phenomenon for the moment purely speculative, which results in a distortion of space-time continuum, having effects on the course of time. To make it simpler, it is the phenomenon that allows us to travel in time by borrowing doors called faults. The space-time rifts could occur in a natural way or be artificially provoked. It requires a great expenditure of energy. Although these ideas had been discussed before, it was not until 1935 that serious speculations about possible shortcuts in space-time or passages into parallel universes were made. Albert Einstein and Nathan Rosen, both physicists, put forward the idea that it would be possible to travel from one place in the universe to another through a space-time tunnel, the Einstein-Rosen bridge, or wormhole. This theory is a major advance in the study of space-time distortions, and although this phenomenon seems to come straight out of a science fiction movie, it could explain some of the disappearances surrounding the Bermuda Triangle. And for good reason, testimonies were able to relate facts strongly approaching time distortions, like the accounts of Bruce Gernon, Helen Cascio, or Ted Jones. The date is December 4th, 1970. Bruce Gernon, accompanied by his father and his partner, took off from Andros Island in the Bahamas in a small tourist plane called the Bonanza. It was 3 p.m., and Bruce, the pilot, was heading for the Florida coast, a route he was familiar with because he had flown it a dozen times before, but this day, the things are not going to happen in the same way. He first saw a small cloud in front of him, rather low in altitude. This cloud seemed to be getting bigger and bigger, not because the plane was getting closer, but its size was really getting bigger and bigger. He managed to get through it and got out safely. At an altitude of 3,500 meters or 11,500 feet, a second cloud appeared in front of him, much more massive this time. With no other option, Bruce had to fly through it. Once inside the cloud, it was pitch black. Then lightning started to appear inside the black mass. The cloud then began to take on a cylindrical shape, 1 kilometer wide. It seemed endless to cross. Finally, the crew saw light at the end of the tunnel, but something incredible happened. The walls of the cloud tunnel began to close in on the plane. The navigation equipment began to panic. The compass needles turned in all directions. Nothing would respond. Bruce persevered with the navigation to get his plane out of the tunnel. With as much acceleration as the plane would allow, he finally made it out of the turbulent cloud. Bruce then tried to contact the control tower to determine the position of the Bonanza. The tower told him that the Bonanza was over Miami Beach. Surprised, Bruce made a quick calculation of the flight time and distance flown, and it didn't add up. He thought it was a control tower error. The fog dissipated and the sun came out. Once his eyes were acclimated to the bright light, Bruce realized that he was indeed flying over Miami Beach. That day, Bruce Gernon flew for 47 minutes and covered 400 kilometers, or 250 miles. The Bonanza is totally incapable of making such a journey in such a short time. So what happened on December 4th, 1970? It is only 2 years later that Bruce Gernon had knowledge that some scientists attributed some of the disappearances of the Bermuda Triangle to space-time anomalies. He then went back over what he had experienced that day. His calculations allowed him to estimate that the trip through the tunnel would have been about 160 kilometers, or 100 miles, made in only 3 minutes. Such a reality would have literally blown up the Bonanza and its passengers. So what really happened that day? The story of Helen Cascio is undoubtedly one of the strangest disappearances that involves the unexplainable. We're now at June 7th, 1964. Helen Cascio, an experienced aviator, took off in her passenger plane, the Cessna 172, accompanied by a passenger. According to her flight plan, she left Pompano Beach, Florida, for Grand Turk Island in the Turks and Caicos Islands, an area with which she was familiar. At the scheduled time of her landing, her plane is well and truly seen in the sky. Witnesses saw her drawing circles over the island for almost 30 minutes. Only instead of landing, Helen Cascio turned around to disappear in a cloud bank and never reappear. But what really happened that day? The mystery of this story is of course not solved. However, some elements have been brought to light because although she did not receive any message from the ground, her conversations during the flight were heard by the control tower. Surprising exchanges. Indeed, after having launched a call to the control tower in order to indicate that her compass was going in all directions, Helen Cascio observes the landscape that she flies over and seems questioned. She doesn't understand where she can be. The aviatrix affirms that the island she flies over resembles Grand Turk by its shape, but that this island seemed deserted, uninhabited. No dwellings, neither airport nor roads, nor the least construction. His passenger confirms totally this description. On the ground, the plane is well visible, but does not receive the answers of the control tower, which vainly tries to confirm their position. Helen and her passenger wonder how they will get out of there. The weather is clear, and it seems impossible that Helen could not see the island and all the infrastructure. Deciding to turn around, the Cessna 172 turned completely towards the sea and entered a cloud mass never to come out again. Searches were initiated immediately, but came to nothing. No trace of the aviator, her passenger, or the plane. Some theories say that it is quite plausible that a plane of such a small size could fall into the sea and sink immediately without leaving any trace. Nevertheless, other, less rational explanations have come to the fore. The aviatrix could have involuntarily found herself in a space-time rift, which would have taken her to a time when the island was not yet inhabited. She would have come back, but in wanting to turn back, she would have plunged back into this rift and would have remained trapped there forever. Was this an illusion or a real distortion? Another astonishing story is similar to that of Helen Cascio. It is the adventure of another pilot, Ted Jones. He was lucky enough to be able to tell the story of his experience because he came out of it unscathed. We are in the fall of 1969. Ted Jones leaves for a flight between Bimini and Florida in his training plane, a single-engine low wing. The flight was uneventful until Ted Jones encountered a sea of clouds as he approached the Florida coast. The crossing went well, and the aviator managed to stay on course, but when he emerged from the cloud mass, he was surprised. He was astonished to see that he was not flying over Florida as he should have been, but over Bimini. He had returned to his starting point. Ted Jones was sure of himself. He never changed course or turned back, and he had watched his navigation instruments at every moment. Once again, a mystery without an answer. Despite the mysteries surrounding the Bermuda Triangle, scientific research has brought rational answers. If in the 1950s there was a lack of means and knowledge, this easily left room for mysteries and more far-fetched explanations. However, today, with the advancement of new technologies and innovative progress in the field of hydrography, scientists have access to state-of-the-art equipment to probe, visualize, and experiment with the ocean floor. For example, sonars now allow the precise visualization of the seabed. This has also allowed us in 2020 to find a 95-year-old wreck. Various scientific explanations are now available to justify the events that occur in the Bermuda Triangle. Here are the main ones. Among the various scientific theories evoked, that of oceanic flatulence often comes up. These are underwater emissions of methane gas that would be able to considerably decrease the density of water and cause a loss of buoyancy. Once the gas is released into the atmosphere, it would also represent a danger to aircraft. the effects of this phenomenon would occur so quickly that a boat or a plane would not even have time to send an emergency call. It is in the Kara Sea off the Yamal Peninsula that such effects have been observed. The researchers who speak of Siberian sinkholes assume that this same phenomenon could occur in the Bermuda Triangle area. But what is really going on in the seabed, and how could it affect marine and air navigation? Why is there gas on the ocean floor? The ocean floor in the Bahamas, Florida, and Bermuda Islands region is full of huge reserves of naturally occurring methane gas. Indeed, by decomposing organic matter, anaerobic and methanogenic microorganisms produce methane. It is stored in the ocean depths in the form of methane hydrate and is present in large quantities, but it is difficult to exploit. To explain what methane hydrates are like under a microscope, imagine a thin cage of ice with methane trapped inside. This happens under conditions of low temperature and high pressure, conditions found on the ocean floor. In the deepest parts of the ocean, in the sediments, which are the particles that have been deposited on the bottom under the effect of gravity, methane hydrate is found, but also on the submarine slopes, better known as the continental slopes, at a depth of several hundred meters. Thus, trapped in solid form, these gases do not reach the ocean surface. However, if the temperature or pressure fluctuates, the ice will melt and the gas will be released. How does the emission of gas decrease the density of the water? At the time of global warming, the melting of ice is strongly favored, and the release of gas as well. Indeed, the stability of methane hydrate is based on precise temperature and pressure factors. The slightest variation leads to the release of gas. This is how the ice cages burst and release the methane as bubbles under the water. Ground movements and tectonic fractures also promote the release of gas. The water on the surface mixed with the gas will cause instability and a notable decrease in its density. As a result, vessels in this area lose buoyancy as the buoyancy is weaker, and literally sink as soon as they sink beyond the limit of their hull. What are the dangers once the gas is released into the atmosphere? The consequences for aircraft are also significant. According to the latest research, the presence of methane in the air would cause atmospheric turbulence. This would reduce the lift of planes and aircraft, and would also cause the shutdown of thermal piston engines or jet engines. We could therefore suppose that the disappearance of some planes is due to the fact that they were crossing a methane slick coming from the sea, once again in the wrong place at the wrong time. Recently, a team of researchers in geosciences has studied the question of the Bermuda Islands. Thanks to new technologies, they were able to apprehend the island and its surroundings with a different look, and this was not without surprise. The sonar is the instrument which allowed us to reveal the seabeds of Bermuda. This underwater detection device uses sound waves to locate, spot, and identify submerged objects. In concrete terms, sonar allows us to obtain a map of the ocean floor, as if the ocean had been emptied of water. Once the water was removed, the researchers discovered that the tiny archipelago was in fact a tiny emerged part of a huge underwater mountain of 4,000 meters high, or 13,000 feet. The volcanic nature of the Bermuda Islands was already known to scientists, but how could a mountain of such a size have come into being? During the first phase of the formation of the Atlantic Ocean, a huge volcanic eruption took place in a rather isolated area of the ocean floor. During the millions of years that followed, the volcano rose little by little until it exceeded the surface of the ocean. The island was initially between 900 and 1,000 meters above the water level, i.e. almost 3,200 feet high. Then, 30 million years ago, the volcano fell asleep. Wind and rain did their job of eroding the mountain and reducing it to a plateau. forming a small island on top of a huge seamount. Over the years, millions of tiny mollusks have accumulated on the walls, along with algae, shells, and thick layers of limestone, forming a landscape of sharp reefs at the highest point. The material obtained after millions of years is described as sharp and could even pierce a ship and sink it in seconds. Note that some reefs can reach up to 12 meters high or 40 feet high. The professor of marine biology, Tom Illife, reported that between the reefs 12 meters or 40 feet high and the abysses 8,000 meters or 26 feet deep, huge tunnels were formed in which a powerful suction force could be measured. This is the phenomenon of the peat bog theory. This natural phenomenon of the ecosystem would be able to suck huge objects under the surface of the water. These vortices are accentuated by the weather, especially by strong winds. The power of the generated whirlpools then takes the mythical shape of a funnel in which no ship could get out. The Bermuda Triangle is in the middle of a particularly violent meteorological activity. Hurricanes, equatorial storms, and thunderstorms are regularly in action in this area, which does not facilitate travel by boat or plane. The hurricane is a tropical cyclone, a phenomenon comparable to a very violent storm with strong winds. It is a large area of rotating storm clouds, coupled with strong winds. Tropical cyclones are feared because they are destructive on land, in the air, and in the sea. It is one of the most common natural hazards that will cause a large number of victims. The Caribbean is one of the most strongly affected areas. Coupled with extreme meteorology, the micro gusts of wind blowing at more than 270 kilometers per hour, almost 160 miles per hour, and can cause waves of disproportionate size. These are called rogue waves. Rogue waves are sudden, oceanic waves of an edifying size. The height of a rogue wave must be 2.1 times greater than the other waves surrounding it at the same time. These waves have long been considered a myth, because until the 20th century, scientists did not have the means to measure them, and sailors who teased the bottle too much were clearly accused of having imagined these scenes. Today, we're able to confirm that these waves do indeed take shape. However, due to the vastness of the ocean and the speed of the waves, observations and measurements are still rare. Rogue waves have always been the dread of sailors. Formed spontaneously and isolated, these waves, described as gigantic, can overturn entire ships. At the time, they were described as monstrous walls of water that rose up before them out of nowhere. A normal wave will caress the ship, where the rogue wave will hit it violently. Rogue waves can reach a height of 30 meters or 100 feet and cause a pressure of up to 100 tons per square meter. No ship is designed to withstand this much pressure or to withstand impacts high above the waterline. Such an impact would sink it immediately. In English, these waves have been nicknamed killer waves. In spite of the long-standing accounts, it was only in 1995 that the first rogue wave could be measured and studied. A wave of 26 meters high, or 85 feet, was then recorded in the middle of waves of less than 12 meters, or 40 feet. The maritime myth has since then been transformed into reality. But are these waves responsible for the shipwrecks in the Bermuda Triangle? Ocean scientist Simon Boxall of the National Oceanographic Center and the University of Southampton says that rogue waves are forming in the Bermuda Triangle area. According to him, these waves can form at any place where storms meet, which is the case in the Bermuda Triangle area. Storms coming from Mexico, the equator, and further east in the Atlantic can collide, causing waves in different directions that cross each other to form walls of water. The scientist and his team recreated the phenomenon of rogue waves in a tank on a scaled-down reproduction of the freighter USS Cyclops. The latter disappeared in 1918 in the Bermuda Triangle. In a few minutes, the force of the rogue waves damaged the ship until it sank to the bottom of the basin. This theory is, however, discussed by other scientists, who claim that extreme waves due to harsh weather conditions should not be confused with rogue waves. We will have to wait for more studies to confirm this theory, which, in any case, cannot explain the accidents involving airplanes. The Gulf Stream is a warm ocean surface current. It originates between Florida and the Bahamas and disperses into the Atlantic Ocean. In 1513, the Spanish navigator Juan Ponce de Leon noticed that his ships were carried away by a warm water current. In 1770, Benjamin Franklin had a study and a map made in order to improve navigation times. This warm current, which crosses the Bermuda Triangle, will cause sudden changes to weather conditions. Thus, planes and ships are sometimes surprised by violent storms in a short time. The Gulf Stream also influences the formation of waterspouts in this area. The Gulf Stream is described by sailors as a gigantic conveyor belt, measuring about 80 meters wide or 260 feet wide. Taken in the same direction, it will carry ships away, but if they are facing the Gulf Stream in the opposite direction, boats may see their sailing speed drop. In addition, debris from planes or boats in this current could be quickly dispersed throughout the ocean. This could explain why some aircraft and their victims remain missing forever. Waterspouts form when cold air currents pass over warm waters. A huge column of rotating air is formed in a funnel shape. This phenomenon resembles a tornado, but only occurs over water. Waterspouts are quite common around the Florida coast. Even if they dissipate fairly quickly, a ship or a low-flying plane that would be in its path would be heavily damaged. The presence of the Gulf Stream in the Bermuda Triangle area favors the formation of waterspouts. Recently, a team of meteorologists have come up with a new hypothesis that could explain the loss of ships in the Bermuda Triangle area. In a Science Channel documentary, these scientists highlight a very particular meteorological phenomenon resulting in the formation of large clouds with an unusual hexagonal shape. It is on images of the Terra satellite taken by NASA that clouds of hexagonal shape measuring between 30 and 80 meters in diameter, or almost 260 feet in diameter, could be observed over the ocean. These shapes are very surprising since cloud formation is mostly random. According to scientists, these cloud structures would be able to generate extremely violent winds of more than 270 kilometers per hour, that is to say, more than 160 miles per hour. The air currents descend to the base of the cloud and hit the ocean. This creates powerful waves and strong disturbances at the surface, real air bombs that can sweep everything in their path. The malfunctioning of the navigation instruments of planes and ships has often been reported by pilots and navigators during the tragic events in the Bermuda Triangle area. These are not random coincidences, but could point to a disturbance of the Earth's magnetic field in this area. But what is the magnetic field? Nicknamed the Earth's shield by scientists, the Earth's magnetic field is generated by the complex movements of fluid in the Earth's outer core. It is the field that forces all compasses to point in the same direction, the magnetic north, or guides migrating animals in their great journeys. It is a powerful invisible shield that protects our planet from cosmic particles. Planes and ships are therefore dependent on the magnetic field in order to locate and orient themselves in large areas without visual reference points, such as the oceans. The magnetic declination is the angle between the magnetic North Pole, indicated by the compass, and the geographic North Pole. The geographic north corresponds to the North Pole, where the Earth's axis of rotation passes. The compass will indicate magnetic north, guided by the Earth's magnetic field. This field is constantly in motion. Maps are made by indicating the geographic north, but compasses indicate magnetic north, guided by the Earth's magnetic field. Depending on where you are on Earth, the magnetic declination will be different. In addition, magnetic north shifts over time. Today, it is estimated that it moves about 60 kilometers per year, or 37 miles per year. If inexperienced navigators are unaware of the existence of this magnetic declination, they may find themselves far from their destination, or even make mistakes when calculating a route. This is why navigators used a compass to calculate their trajectories. Magnetic storms define important fluctuations of the Earth's magnetism. These magnetic storms, as they are also called, are caused by variations in solar activity. Because of the sun's mood swings, any system or infrastructure that contains metal or is subject to the flow of electric current could be disrupted. The occurrence of magnetic storms will cause an increase in the magnetic field. For airplanes in flight or ships at sea, this will disturb compass needles and radio waves, a winning combo for pilots and navigators to lose their trajectory and be unreachable. A theory would seem to report that a meteorite would have hit the Earth thousands of years ago, and that it would have been swallowed up in the seabed of the Bermuda Triangle. It is therefore obviously possible that this comet has particular electromagnetic characteristics and causes disturbances in the magnetic field. The existence of this magnetic field and its disturbances implies that sailors must always make a correction for their initial path by taking into account the magnetic declination. If today tools exist for this, a few years ago this was not the case, and the ignorance of all this scientific data could lead ships to their loss. 56% of air accidents and 80% of sea accidents are due to human error. While we often try to justify tragedies that lead to the loss of an entire crew by failure of equipment and the vagaries of the equipment, in many cases, it turns out that the error came from the man himself. Various factors can be involved to justify human error, including fatigue and stress. The causes of possible fatigue have largely been taken into account in the new working conditions, imposing rest periods and maximum working times that must not be exceeded. However, in the past, pilots and sailors were not subject to the labor code and could have to sail many days in a row. Also, with an accumulation of fatigue, attention is no longer optimal, and the risk of causing accidents becomes more significant. Moreover, crossing the Bermuda Triangle, whether by ship or by plane, is a real expedition. Between deplorable weather conditions and the unpredictable sea, this crossing can quickly turn into a fight against the raging elements. The stress that arises in these situations affects the performance and rational initiative of the crew. Decisions made under such pressure often jeopardize the rescue of the aircraft and cause accidents. The mystery of the Bermuda Triangle and its strange, unexplained disappearances has kept us in suspense for decades, and it is certainly not over. The area remains an obligatory passage for thousands of ships and planes that would otherwise have to make an interminable detour. But if you take into account the size of the Bermuda Triangle, the dense air and sea traffic, and the particularly harmful weather conditions, the number of disappearances is not as high as it seems. Moreover, insurance companies do not consider this area as risky and do not increase the premiums of planes and ships that cross it. The Bermuda Triangle is also not part of the 10 most dangerous areas for navigation in the world, established by the World Wildlife Fund organization. And yet, the facts are there. Hundreds of ships, planes, and helicopters have disappeared without leaving any trace, without any debris being found, without any plausible explanation, sometimes without even having issued the slightest emergency call. In 1938, the Anglo-Australian ship even sent a message saying that the weather was ideal and that everything was fine, just before disappearing with the 38 people in its crew. It was never heard from again. Scientific discoveries have shown us that underwater phenomena, such as ocean flatulence, can clearly affect the paths of ships and aircrafts on the ocean and cause irreversible damage. The area is also subject to very hostile climate that can cause hurricanes, huge waves, and other extremely dangerous phenomena. Not to mention that, statistically, pilots and navigators are very often responsible for their own loss. But these rational answers do not justify all tragedies, and some authors prefer to look for clarifications in dimensions related to the paranormal, or through other more mystical theories. In addition, beyond the disappearances, testimonies have also reported apparitions. In 1935, a ghostly plane would have been seen diving into the ocean, which was not very deep at that place, but the research undertaken did not find any trace of the wreck. In 1975, when an oceanographer wanted to take a picture of a magnetic storm, he realized during the development that another ship was also present on the picture. However, he is certain that he did not come across any other ship that day. The Bermuda Triangle has obviously not revealed all of its secrets. The line is thin between the rational and the irrational, because we can't study the paranormal scientifically. The scientific advances of today are capable of explaining certain facts considered as irrational yesterday. So, will the scientific researches of tomorrow be able to explain the inconsistencies of today?